idea.
Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. I'm Reed Price, and I'll be hosting today with David Harrison, who is the founder of the Northwest Policy Center at the University of Washington. He frequently joins us to analyze the national political landscape and try to look at reality, but not without a sense of optimism. This month, I think we're going to talk about three things, which he will get to in a moment. But first, I want to thank Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island for sponsoring this program. Fieldstone offers independent living, assisted living, and memory care up on Rolling Bay. You can take a tour of their beautiful campus by calling Celia or Jamie at 206-594-1010. You can check out their website at fieldstonecommunities.com. And you can also inquire about their day stay and respite programs. Also, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water, who have lived on these lands and waters adjacent to the Salish Sea or as the Salish Sea since time immemorial. We are grateful for their stewardship, and we are working to learn from them to be better stewards. David, I know that there's a lot to talk about, and I appreciate you coming to talk about it.
I'm looking forward to it. Let me click. There we go. So our three topics are the courts, what the Republicans are going to do with the big, huge budget bill, which Trump has called one big, beautiful bill that hasn't yet emerged. And then we'll end with a short vignette on Democratic candidates in the future. So we had a nice session a couple months ago with 20 or so, all of us. And as Reed and I just discussed, we're prepared to go back to monthly. I just got back from an epic trip with a whole bunch of Bainbridge Islanders to the Mediterranean. So I'm armed. There, Cindy was worried about what people would think of us over there. They're not thinking about individual American citizens, just the boss. I want to, before we get into three topics, make sure that we distinguish between bad governing, which we've had a fair amount of in the United States, and unimaginable moral decrepitude, which we really haven't had that frequently. It's virtually unprecedented, but this president certainly has it. Lots of times you get this talked about as Donald Trump is not values driven, that he's transactional, that is a la art of the deal, so-called art of the deal, that he gets into a situation, stakes out an aggressive position and does whatever he can to win. What's happening is not exactly that. It's true that he's, at one time or another in life, he's basically expressed every close to every value that the Democratic Party has expressed, and that the Republican Party has expressed, and that MAGA has expressed. So he's not been all on one page. He's just seeking the adulation that some Americans have given him. But in our lifetime, we've had Democratic governors, for instance, that didn't talk every day about the essence of government. Gary Locke is a great example. Another elected official in Washington once said to me, David, the governor is not values driven. That was a little unfair. Gary Locke was dedicated on a daily basis to make government work. So where his values came in was he believed that government could work and was doing good things for people, and that the government he ran would do better things for people if he ran it well, which he pretty much did. Whereas other elected Democrats in Washington State have been a little bit more articulate on the grand schemes of democracy seekers. Trump is totally different from that. He's transactional and he's not values driven, but he's in search of the opposite of what Gary Locke was searching. He's trying to make government not work for the most part, or much of government not work. So it's a pretty bad time to be a fan of government doing well. And of course, in some cases, that means people are going to die because of his aggressive malevolence. A great example of that, of course, is he's in the Ukraine negotiations and he says Zelensky doesn't have any cards. Well, he took the cards away. Of course, he doesn't have any cards. The cards were American and NATO defenses against Putin's aggression. So to have Zelensky have to give up a mess of territory and rights to minerals because he doesn't have the cards that Trump took away from him at the outset means a whole bunch of people are going to die that wouldn't have died. And there's subtle ways that people will die. When you cut, lead paint monitoring in the schools, some kids are going to get brain damage from eating pieces of paint or being exposed to them who otherwise wouldn't. Government counts, matters in the lives of the people. The better you do, the better the people are. And this almost apology that he's a deal maker is ridiculous because it matters what deal you're trying to make. The other thing that happens is, of course, if you're a real estate developer and you're trying to make a deal, say, with another real estate developer, the two people principally involved are you and them. But when you're trying to make a deal with Canada, it's more complicated because if it was just you and the prime minister, you could get in a room and be an ass and do anything you wanted that might get you to a middle ground that serves you better than the middle ground that would have been the middle ground if you hadn't been a jerk. The problem is the Canadian people are getting to the point where they won't accept a deal that might even be reasonable for the Canadian people. And beyond that, they'll make us pay individually. And already, all you got to do is own a restaurant in Bellingham, and that's already happening. And perish the thought if you own a VRBO in Palm Springs. This is long-lasting damage. We'll recover from it, but let's not make light of it. The three things, first, of course, the courts, and of course, as usual, I'll stop after I lay out some ideas. The question is, are the courts the salvation of the resistance? And I think we already know before I launch into this that the answer is a bit. In some cases, there's been some worry on the screen about what will happen if the Supreme Court says Donald Trump has to do something and he refuses to do it. That's not going to happen. 75% of Republicans polled want Trump to follow whatever the court says he has to do. And the court itself, of course, is extremely careful to the point of inventing an all-new immunity defense for him 6 months ago. So what's going to happen is the Supreme Court's going to make him do some things, and then he'll scapegoat the court. He said the other day, interestingly, I am stymied at every turn by the U.S. Supreme Court, for which I have such great respect. So he should have respect for me. They bailed his butt out before the election. So they astonishingly managed the immunity defense so that he would not face meaningful criminal prosecution while he was running for office. But there is a shining light. From the time that Amy Coney Barrett sided with Roberts for the 5 on initial due process issues, the courts, from district court to appellate court onto the Supremes, have been adamant about the due process rights under the Constitution, 5th and 14th Amendments, not just of citizens, but of undocumented deportees. And those process rights are understanding in advance the nature of the charges being brought, being able to examine and provide evidence, and having an unbiased deliberation as to the outcome. That doesn't mean in district court necessarily. It could be an immigration court or elsewhere, but you can watch this go back and forth for a year, and there will not be a case where the Supreme Court steps away from due process rights. And so that's pretty cool. That means the best news of all is that the court's just getting started on establishing due process rights for deportees. And that's why the Supreme Court a couple of weeks ago ruled at 2 o'clock on a Saturday morning, told Trump to stop because they were afraid something was going to happen to 200 Latino detainees that next afternoon. And it goes on. There's a ruling yesterday by a district court judge that the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, big surprise, doesn't apply, does not give the president statutory authority to deport people without due process, because that refers to a declared war or an obvious invasion. And the courts will continue to say that. So where's the rub on this particular issue? The rub is what happens with temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions. If you follow this closely, you're following either the Washington Post or New York Times regular analysis of where court legal action stands in the 60 or so temporary restraining orders that we've gotten. And you feel pretty good about some parts of it, especially due process rights. What's happening is, as you know, a federal district court judge can commit to a temporary restraining order, or differently, a preliminary injunction, which is appealable, and freeze the government in its tracks. And what's been happening more than ever in our history is that judges who issue those injunctions are enjoining the government nationally from their district court seat. So that happened 12 times a year or so with George Bush Jr., and there must be 12 outstanding right now. The court, not just Alito, but and Clarence Thomas, but Kavanaugh and Gorsuch have already indicated that they believe or think that it's okay for a district court judge to issue an injunction or a restraining order with regard to the specific plaintiffs in a lawsuit, like the 200 undocumented in Texas, but not to enjoin the Department of Justice and ICE nationwide, because then you're enjoining with regard to all present and prospective plaintiffs. The problem is what's going to happen with the issue of district courts being able to make something temporarily stick nationally as it works its way through the system. That's more difficult, and it's all going to come up on the 15th, because the court's going to hear that specific issue with regard to birthright citizenship. And it couldn't be harder, because their inclination would be to protect everybody, but their underlying reading of the law is that injunctions are meant to protect the specific plaintiffs. So what you'd have to do if you're the ACLU or the Brennan Center or somebody is get a class action going, and that has to be certified. So temporarily you'd win, but you'd only win for those 200 people. And meanwhile, ICE would be slam dunking people into El Salvador. So the court's going to be in a quandary, and Amy Coney Barrett's going to be in the eyeglasses, or maybe Kavanaugh, because they don't want 10 different district courts to have different opinions on birthright citizenship. Because what Trump is trying to do is deny those citizenship rights the second the child is born. So you have an injured party. Every child born in America from the day the order is allowed to stand. And if you don't enjoin them nationally, then there'll be a patchwork across America where the government can treat them basically as undocumented. They have no right to be here. So on May 15th, that will be problematic. We can still win a ton of cases. Eventually, appellate courts will establish national standing. So we would still win all the due process cases. But in the meantime, it would be a free-for-all as lawyers across the land try to get federal district courts to all say the same thing, which they will pretty much do on citizenship, but not on a lot of these other issues. The other thing I want to say about where we're winning and losing is we're winning quite a bit on Trump freezing dollars. There's about $400 billion being frozen right now. And the courts have has forced them to spend certain money. And what they're, as I've said before on this screen, they're supposed to be following the 1974 Impoundment Act, which was put in after Nixon froze some dollars. And under that act, interestingly, the president announces a rescission, and in 45 days has to have a majority vote of both houses to support that rescission. Reason why they haven't done that is they can't get that. On almost no rescission would they be able to get that. They might be able to get it for low-hanging fruit, but instead they just decided to create this bizarre situation. So you can continue to watch that. We'll have some wins and some losses. But Congress, as you know, has spending authority, and ultimately, unless the court's not going to overturn the 1974 law. So eventually this has got to calm down a bit. Surprisingly, Democrats haven't emphasized the need to use the law. They're just emphasizing the fact that he's frozen the money. The other thing I want to underscore is obviously he's taken a hammer to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but some of those actions are not going to stand because the court has long objected to what are called crossover sanctions. So you could sanction a university for doing something if you're a president with broad powers, but the sanction has to be related to what they're doing. So if all of a sudden, you're removing student aid money because they have a DEI program, then you got a problem with the courts. So DEI lawsuits are not over by any means. The other winners so far is law firms that have sued Trump's nailing them for past representation of Democratic clients. The things that are less likely to win, as I've said before, are Trump's ability to fire people will eventually be withheld. So that's it on the courts. The good news is due process is with us to stay. We're going to have a year full of the government losing on due process, lacking deportations, and these are not all going to be court trials, but the Supreme Court and appellate courts will make them provide a limited degree of due process to everybody, green card holders included. So I'll stop there. Questions, thoughts, insults on these matters?
What about the idea that they're either lying or ignoring court rulings as much as they possibly can. I mean, I get the whack-a-mole thing of trying to be able to move to a state like Louisiana where they have the sense that they have more power. But the administration also seems to be, or at least their lawyers seem to be dancing around the possibility of contempt of court charges.
Yeah, up to the edge, they'll do that. And the other day, I don't know which case this was, Department of Justice attorney stated that he didn't know what the government wanted either, and Pam Bondi fired him. But yeah, there's forum shopping. You raised two different things. Forum shopping is picking a good district court for something, but it was Texas that just did this ruling on due process. And the other is slow walking, following the court's order. Eventually, you will be found in contempt, and it won't be the president, it'll be you. And so eventually that will slow down. But of course, it's very evident in the Boisbert case where they did fly those guys to El Salvador when they knew they weren't supposed to. And the defense that the plane was across the border, of course, is ridiculous. It was Department of Justice that was being enjoined. It doesn't matter. They could have been already on the ground. It doesn't matter. It was an order not to do it. Other questions about the courts? Well, you guys are quiet today.
David, I would love to hear your opinion on what you think is happening. You touched on it briefly, but at the university level, higher education, sort of the attack, obviously the most recognizable names have been Columbia and Harvard, but it seems like this is an issue that's not going to go away. And what are your thoughts on how universities are going to handle this, and not just at the university level, but also with their students, and specifically the students that are coming into the universities from abroad that now feel like their status could be threatened?
Well, I'll answer, and then I'll ask your cousin-in-law, who's an expert on higher education, to answer. I didn't see that Bill was there, so I'll give him a chance to say too. I think that predominantly universities are trying to change the language of DEI to get out of being the target. I think it's good for universities for Harvard to be the target, and the news is that Harvard got the letter from the DOJ prematurely, which advantages them. So there is the issue I raised of crossover sanctions, where there's well-established law that the sanction for erroneous behavior or malfeasance by the university would have to be related to the malfeasance. Nonetheless, if you're a university, you don't want this to happen. It freezes donors. Some international students are sitting there in India deciding not to come. So I don't want to minimize the impact. Eventually, the courts will push the Trump administration back a little bit. But as with private foundations, just pushing them back a little bit doesn't mean that universities shouldn't be scared. And because the courts will never afford them the level of protection that they think they need to have to run like they've been running, which is with relative freedom from the federal government. Bill, have you watched this? You want to talk about this?
First, hello, David, my former colleague at the Evans School at the University of Washington. I was invited by a member of this group, who's a friend of mine, I was alerted that you were speaking, so I'm signed up and happy to be here. Very erudite comments by David. He's following this the legal struggles, the battle here very closely. On the universities, which that is my area of expertise, is higher education policy. There is some real damage being done here, no question about it, even if some of these things are rolled back. On the point about international students, almost certainly our reputation among abroad, among prospective international students and scholars So think of graduate students, potential postdoctoral scholars, something like 40% of whom are from abroad, visiting faculty, et cetera. And many of these scholars end up staying in the United States. And I've seen some statistics about 40% of the major companies in the United States being founded by people from abroad who were educated here and attracted by our universities. So this is a big deal. And also universities in recent years, I've recently written a paper about the decline of state funding for public universities in the United States over the last, let's say 25 years or so, going back to 2000. It's pretty substantial. And one way that they have managed to survive financially is to admit a lot more international students. Now, for the most part, that's undergraduates, not the graduate students I was mentioning before, but it's some graduate students at the master's level as well as undergraduates. It's a significant source of revenue. And these students typically pay most of the full tuition, like out-of-state students would. So that's an issue hurting the university's finances, which are in another downturn, like the ones we've seen in the past that have been very damaging. So that's a concern. Then turning to research, these stoppages of funds and the slow walking of grant reviews for next year's grants. Okay, so you stop this year's grants, and people who are living on the income, the salary from those grants are cut off, and they can't tend their cultures in the lab and all that kind of thing, and projects are essentially ruined by these kind of stoppages. Then you stop next year's grants. So those are the grants that we're going to support graduate students and postdocs and faculty and so on. And that has a big effect as well. Just a personal note, my daughter was just laid off by her research organization in Washington, D.C. She brought in $30 million of federal money in her career, and that was no longer useful to the company, which had lost 40% or 50% of its revenue. So she was laid off after 13 years with that research company. And that's a quasi-university kind of research organization. So there's real damage to the incentives for people to pursue higher education, particularly careers as researchers and so on. This is and the kind of research that's done is just across the board, but the most obvious damage is in the medical research. What is the logic of cutting these kinds of programs at the National Institutes of Health? Pardon me?
Go ahead. Sorry.
I saw one in terms of the tactics that are used, or the methods that are used around this. I saw something yesterday about grants in covering the idea of biodiversity reduction were targeted by the algorithm because it had the word diversity in it, or the root word diversity in it. So you cut off a grant related to biodiversity because it has the word diversity. It makes no sense. So there are real consequences to this. I think I'm glad to see the Harvard-led response standing up to the excesses here and trying to. I think Harvard may not be trying to do this exactly, but it certainly catalyzed the beginnings of a serious response here by higher education, which I think is a really positive development and essential. We'll see how effective it is, but in any case, the damage is not going to be short-lived. This has already had a big impact.
So we'll have to leave that there. That's excellent. Of course, we couldn't do any better than having Bill school us in that way. I think the only thing I could say to make it even worse is the defenses, there's defenses in court, such as those we've mentioned, but in terms of Congress doing real work defending America's universities, it's not their first choice. And so you're going to see a lot of universities continue to bend to try and get out of the way. That doesn't fix some of the problems Bill enumerated, but certainly that's what's going to happen at DEI. You're not going to call your program DEI anymore. You're going to figure out how to mask it. Let's go on to a related issue, and that is the big, beautiful budget bill. There's 5 issues. Thank you, Bill and Tom, for that. The speaker wants a big, beautiful reconciliation bill by the end of May. And as you remember, Biden did this 2-3 times with success with Joe Manchin's help. And it's a budget rule that allows you to avoid the filibuster as long as you follow the rules of the Senate and the House. You just need 50 votes, and they're bargaining that they won't lose anybody, basically, in either the Senate or House, or they could lose Murkowski and Collins and almost no House members. And you'd think that'd be impossible, but of course, the penalty for standing up to Trump on this is death, or political death. So it's not an easy decision to make if you're one of the few remaining moderate House members. So there's 5 issues. And even before you get to them, the separate matter is when the Republicans are going to raise the debt ceiling, which they have to do. Trump is sympathetic to a position that we shouldn't have a debt ceiling. He didn't think of that back when Biden had to raise it. So they actually had a chance to extend it longer, and it would have benefited Trump, but they turned it down. And so now Trump is facing it, and there's no chance that Hakeem Jeffries is going to give him votes. He's going to make him do it. And in addition to this, John Thune, who was majority leader in the Senate, has to navigate budget rules that they've tried to ignore, but there'll be points of order challenges, points of procedure, parliamentarian rulings in the Senate that will slow them down. John Thune is saying no way for May. There's 5 issues to watch. There are these. First, Medicaid cuts. They're not going to get to a solution without taking $1 trillion or more out of Medicaid. And here's the problem. They can't do that without tearing Medicaid apart. And so they're going to do 2 things. They're going to promise to their moderates that they're being careful, and they're going to promise to their conservatives that they're making major cuts, and they're just going to lie. And the best way to do that is to reduce the state share. So they're going to try and do a lot of the cuts by reducing the state share of Medicaid that states brought into when Obama expanded Medicaid, I mean, not Medicare, and they're going to try and lay it off and say it was a state decision. But even so, Medicaid is going to get absolutely hammered. And as conservatives say, if you're for tax cuts, you got to be for Medicaid cuts, because you can't get to any reasonable number without doing that. Other 4 issues are interesting. There's battles in the Republican Party over certain energy tax credits, especially consumer ones like vehicles. They like them, and they would have to go, or likely. There's battles over whether the Pentagon really needs $100 billion more. A lot of Republican members think the Pentagon's got plenty of money, but it's politically a loaded issue. There's arguments over what will be in the tax side of this monumental bill. So in addition to renewing everything we passed in 2017, which is a big order, Trump went to Nevada to help win Nevada and promised no taxes on tips. And there's some talk about no taxes on overtime. And there's some talk about carried interest credits, which have to do with tax class that millionaire investors are in. All those things cost money. Some Republicans even floated increasing the tax rate for the most wealthy Americans. That was shot down. They got a world of trouble But don't underestimate what Trump could do. The penalty is political elimination. And so you're going to look at, oh, I left out the fifth issue. Amazingly, back when I worked with Maria Cantwell, I said this would never happen. Amazingly, Republican legislators are holding from California and New York are holding out to increase the state and local taxes deduction on your federal taxes, which is now limited to $10,000. You pay property taxes on Bainbridge, you just met that, close to it. So they want to increase that a lot. And they said they won't vote for big bill, beautiful bill unless that changes. May get changes, but they already are talking about a solution, and that is change it for everybody, but people over $400,000 a year. And then you can get there in terms of balance, because so much of that deduction would be taken by people that don't need it. So anyway, these are the 5 issues. Don't underestimate with these. You'd think with these tight margins, 5 votes, 4 votes in the House and a couple in the Senate, 3, that it would make the last member more powerful. But it doesn't work that way, because when it's the focus on you is enormous, just enormous. And the ability of those California and New York Republicans to bear under that pressure, I think, is not so great. Who's really walking the plank is Republican members who have high Medicaid usage in their districts, much more than sales tax. They're going to have to go to their districts and admit that they voted for $1.5 trillion of Medicaid cuts, and that exposes them in November of next year a lot. So, I mean, it was already likely that Democrats could take back the House, but this will be remembered. So that's where we stand with the bill. That's what's going to happen this summer, the big, beautiful bill. And in it, you'll get pretty much the same tax law you have now, unless you're a tip owner. The big, painful part of the bill that they will pass, since you wouldn't mind them increasing the debt ceiling, the big, painful part of it will definitely be Medicaid cuts that will be significant and will mean some kid somewhere who's got a perforated eardrum and screaming in pain is not going to get medical care. You cannot discount how many people are going to not get medical care because of $1.5 trillion of Medicaid cuts. Questions, thoughts, concerns on the budget battle?
One of the things I've heard the speaker, Mike Johnson, say, it seems to be kind of a careful formulation around Medicaid, is everybody who is eligible will continue to get Medicaid, which I think means things like adding a work requirement or things like that, in addition to I hadn't heard about passing off the problem to the states, but is it likely that go ahead.
The work requirement's going to happen, and work requirements have been in play for a long time. It creates the image that there's people, sitting there, refusing to work. There have to be available jobs at the skill level. A lot of the cases, Medicaid recipients are women with small children. There has to be some place to put the kid. So the work requirements, which will become more stringent, are not any, they'll happen, but $200 billion would be a huge estimate on that. So it doesn't get you close to the implicit number that they have in savings that they've come to so far, which is close to $2 trillion over several years. Other questions, thoughts, concerns? It's interesting. You'd think because of these close margins that you would have bargainers. There's always been, 15, 20 members who held the House in balance in close years. And even in Biden's days, you know, they would bargain for things. Manchin made a life of it. But what's happening here is it's so close that, I mean, you take the people who are to the right of Trump on fiscal controls, they don't like it, but what they want is a week of meetings where they get concessions and where they can say they got concessions, and then they'll cave at the end because they don't want to get killed.
Both
And-
Kathleen and Cynthia have raised their hands.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi. I was wondering, it seems to me that Mike Johnson would try to sneak in all sorts of stuff that aren't truly budgetary items into this bill that the Senate parliamentarian would have to weed out. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about the Senate parliamentarian and how good a job they do at weeding stuff out.
Pretty good, you know, there's a history of that Biden had of paring down
Yeah.
reconciliation bills to please the parliamentarian. They did do something last month that was unprecedented, and that is they decided the parliamentarian would have made them count the renewal of the tax bill as new spending, and they decided they were going to call it current policy, even though it hasn't been renewed. And they're basically going to ignore they have the votes to, Murkowski and Collins would let them do that. And however, that only goes so far. And they're not going to sit there and overrule the parliamentarian on germaneness again and again. They just have too much of a tradition. It's just like the 29 people voted for Thune over whoever was running, Cronin or whoever was running against him. And they're not going to sit there and watch the prerogatives of the center of the Senate be destroyed. So they're going to have, implicitly, they'll come up with a bill that's more constrained than the House, and will go to conference, and the House will have to give a bet. Cynthia Schick.
Hi, David.
Hey.
I love the word you
I
used.
can't hear
map-
you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep,
No?
yep,
Yes?
yes.
Okay. You mentioned ways that we can all help push Trump downhill. I really love that image, and we've been having a lot of demonstrations and showing up in the street. We're told to call our congressman, and it feels so redundant, and it doesn't feel like it really makes a difference. But I keep thinking about these committees that are having discussions about things that affect people in every state. And I'm hoping to look somewhere for a strategy on, I can't even figure out exactly what each committee is doing so that I can call every member and say, stop doing this or do more of this. And just wondered if you could point somewhere to help me educate myself on the most critical committees and committee members to hammer on when they do those bad things.
Well, it varies by the issue, and right now in the House, there's 14 committees in play. What I've been trying to do in my blog each time is underscore members who are in the center of the debate and committees. When I come out with a blog on Monday or so, I will do that again. A great way to start is the Problem Solvers Caucus is set up as they say they're working across the aisle. So if you, in the meantime, you want to be ever present in the life of somebody, it would be ever Republican in the Problem Solvers Caucus, because
Okay.
that's where they've announced that they stand. And half of them are sweating over every Medicaid cut already. So that's, I'm just saying they've already advertised that you should call them, but half of them are just lackeys and they're pretending. But start with the Problem Solvers Caucus, and then check my blog on Monday, and I'll give some more. You can always, you know how to research it yourself, although it's hard. You find out X, you go on X committee and you look and see who the members are, and then look and see which members got less than 55% of the vote in the last election.
Oh,
So you could, for instance, go to, I'm forgetting, name of national organization that's not indivisible. Anyway, go to some of these national sites and look
Like
at who's voted.
5051 or Move On or
I'm not, it's somebody else that does a list of, look for lists of targeted Republicans.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So let's go on to our last topic. And it's just a brief one, which is good because we're almost out of time. My answer as to who is going to be the next presidential candidate is, I have no idea. I have no idea. What a mess. So I've said on this page before that the reason why Schumer and even Hakeem Jeffries are not the leader of the Democratic Party is that's not what they're elected to do. I once talked to Cantwell about this, about Harry Reid. I thought I couldn't imagine a worse national spokesman than Harry Reid. And she said he was elected to attend to the individual interests of members in a meticulous fashion. So what happens when you don't have a president and you don't have a leading governor, like maybe Gavin Newsom would be if he hadn't been discredited in multiple ways, is no leader. And that's what Chris Murphy's trying to do. If you follow Chris Murphy, he's not naming himself as president. He's just trying to dignify the opposition with a little focus. Good for him. Same for Cory Booker when he talked for 30 hours. So you go on to honor that. So Buttigieg, Booker, Chris Murphy, Gretchen Whitmer, who met Trump at the airport the other day for political reasons. J.B. Pritzker, who wants to be president in the worst way, but isn't going to be. Kamala, who just gave a speech the other day. My personal favorite, Amy Klobuchar, who didn't run last time just because she had to regain her Senate seat. I don't know. I think maybe somebody we're not even on this list. But here's the good news before we break up. There is no heir apparent to Trump. So you have movements in America where you could naturally slide from one leader to another. This isn't one of them. If you saw a poll of who should be the heir apparent to Trump, nobody would be over 20. No one would say, well, certainly Vance or DeSantis. There's no heir apparent. And that's a problem for a movement like that, which after all isn't necessarily based upon 100% grasp of the facts in the first place. So I would, if I was a Democratic leader. Now that isn't to say we couldn't pull defeat out of the jaws of victory by ourselves, as we almost just did with running an 81-year-old cognitively impaired candidate. But I'm saying it's good news, and it's certainly good news for the taking back the House next November, year from November, because right now the generic congressional vote is running +3 or +4, which is a good thing. And that's my thoughts. Anybody want to throw out a candidate before we close?
Jamie
Tim
Raskin.
Walz.
What? I didn't hear you.
Shapiro-
Cynthia said Jamie Raskin.
Yeah, I don't think he's a national politician.
Bill?
Maybe Shapiro in Pennsylvania, the governor.
I think possibly, Kamala could have picked him. We sure would have won Pennsylvania, I think. Wasn't sure that he had blue state transferability, but I think the vote, taking Walz instead was a vote on trying to make 10 states competitive. And
Yep.
so we lost by a little in a lot of states. And
You know who's
huh?
you know who is also making a play is Bashir in Kentucky.
Yeah, that's what I was struggling for his name. But back when we were talking about vice presidential candidates, he walked the picket line with the UAW. So
Yep.
he's got to have blue state credibility, and he won in a red state. So
Yep. Several, twice, I think.
is he exploring?
Yes, he is.
Ah, well, everybody check that out. That's interesting. Having some, back in the days when we didn't think we could win, we ran somebody from a southern state named Carlos. It's been
Right.
done.
In
Bill
case
Clinton was
anybody's
started
not
from
aware,
Arkansas.
he's the governor of Kentucky.
Right,
Yeah.
but he could be
Andy
he could be a
Bashir.
Clinton or
Yes.
a Carter kind of
Right.
run.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. I had one question for you, David. On the point about the states and Medicaid, to make sure I'm following what you're saying, are you arguing that the Republicans could get enough money back by rolling back those state additions that were made in the Obama? Was it the Obama period? Yeah,
Yeah.
Obama.
So-
Yes.
So in the Obama days, they incentivized states expanding Medicaid or creating and expanding, not creating. And in some states, there were state initiatives that overcame the opposition of Republican leadership. So there were a lot of ads, and that was whatever 15 million people added to Medicaid. That was part of it. So the discussions underway on how to cut would be more focused on how to cut percentages for the growth than it would be the core, but I don't know how that would work. But at any rate, there are active discussions on cutting the state share and thus being able to say that it was the state that rolled back. To complicate it further, some states anticipated that, and they have automatic rollbacks when the federal money doesn't show. And so they don't even have to legislate on it. They just kick in what they passed in the first place. So if you look at the map of the 50 states, there's states that are resolute, there are states that are adding and wouldn't want to subtract, and there are states that would automatically subtract. But yes, they think that's more politically viable than anything beyond the work requirements, I think.
I see. Thanks.
So thanks again to Bill for coming on, and thanks again to neither of us teach anymore, so we can get it, or maybe you do a little bit, but I'll see you at Allison's party.
Yes, right.
And I hope we'll see you all back here on June 6th at 1:30 p.m.
Thanks a lot.
And yes, and your blog, Our Unfinished Work.
Yeah, is most commonly accessed through an e-blast. So if you're not on the e-blast, just email me at dsh347@gmail. Or
Okay.
email Cynthia Schick and she'll tell you how.
All right, Cynthia will set us straight. Thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend, and I really appreciate you coming by, David, every month.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you, Bill, for joining us as well this month.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.